Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Amanda. I am a hand embroidery artist and I run this YouTube channel as well as an embroidery blog that teaches others how to embroider. And my kind of bread and butter is thread painting, and I've never actually done a video focused around it. So I figured I would do an introduction to it because I do have a lot of content on my website and on my Patreon for it, but I haven't really introduced you guys to thread painting here, and I think that's kind of silly because that's mostly the style of embroidery that I do. So I wanted to do a nice overview kind of introduction to thread painting for you. So in this video I'm going to go over some of the basic supplies and some of the basics and techniques that you need to get down to learn how to thread paint, as well as a little demonstration to show you how to thread paint a basic leaf. If you enjoy this tutorial and you're interested in learning more, I have a ton of thread painting patterns that are geared towards all levels of embroiderers, so even if you don't have experience, they're great to get your feet wet with. And I also have a bunch of tutorials on my website and also on my Patreon. I have a bunch of videos for pet portraiture and for thread painting techniques. So if you're interested, I will leave links down below once you watch this video if you're thinking you might want to kind of dive in more. So let's get started. First, I wanted to go over some of the supplies that you'll need. Most of these are pretty much what you would use for any embroidery, but there are a couple things that are a little bit more specific to thread painting. So the first thing that I recommend you have is a needle that is a size 9 or 10 needle. These are pretty fine needles. You want something that's not going to be super large because you'll only be using one strand of thread for the most part if you're trying to really get a subtle blend. You can thread paint with more than one strand, which I do sometimes, but for this tutorial I'm just going to be using one. So you'll need a embroidery needle that will only fit one strand in it, which would be like size 9 or 10 embroidery needle. The next thing that you'll need is a nice embroidery hoop, and you could do like 4 or 5 inch hoop, nothing crazy. And then also you'll need some cotton or linen fabric. I'm using cotton fabric, but I also really enjoy using linen fabric. So this is a little bit larger of a weave, but not much. You want something that's pretty tight woven because you're gonna be making really intricate stitches and blending things together and really packing in the stitches. And if you have a fabric that's kind of looser, you're gonna have holes in the fabric and it's just not gonna be as easy to add in the detail and smooth out your stitches like you'd want. So you wanna make sure that you have a fabric like cotton or linen. The next thing that you'll need is some embroidery thread, and in the United States, one of the brands that is really popular, I think in the UK as well, is DMC thread. And DMC thread comes in a lot of different colors, which is why I like to use it, because you're gonna need a lot of different shades and tones of colors to blend together in order to create a more realistic looking embroidery. So I like to use DMC thread, and I also really like to have on hand a DMC thread chart. I have one that's actually threaded, and this is great because it realistically shows you the colors instead of having a printed card that only shows you, the print resolution it was printed on, and that's not always accurate. And the reason I like to use this card is because sometimes when you are planning out your color scheme and you are looking for colors that will blend well together, you need to kind of have a catalog of all of them so you know which ones you want to use or have to go purchase. So this is a great resource to have on hand as well. You'll of course want to have the usual embroidery scissors like you normally have, and then you also will need a way to transfer your pattern over, which you can use your usual friction pens. Those are great. Water soluble pens are great. But if you're stitching a really intricate piece, I recommend using something called water soluble Solvy. It's by Sulky. This is basically a water soluble stabilizer, but I put it on the front of the fabric because it makes it really easy to trace the design onto. It's translucent, so you can basically just put it in the hoop and then transfer the design over. And I like to use a micron, but I always recommend that people try to test out this stabilizer and whatever pen they're using to make sure that it's not going to bleed once you wash it away. But personally, I actually tear this away a lot. Like, I don't even wash it sometimes because it tears pretty easily once you've perforated enough. So Yeah, I would just definitely check before you do that, because it would be really sad if you embroidered for, you know, 6 hours on a piece and then you wash it and it's ruined. So definitely check that out and try it out first before you actually commit to using it on a piece. But other than that, I think those are the basic things that I like to use for thread painting. I will also leave a few resources. I have a couple of blog posts on thread painting, and I also have a few books that I really recommend to people to learn more about it. So I will link those in the description as well, so you can get your hands on those. So the long and short stitch is really the primary stitch that you use in thread painting. You can use other stitches like split stitch, stem stitch, French knots, back stitch. Those are probably the most common ones you'll see in a thread painting pattern, but it's not as many decorated stitches. It's mostly just blending colors together, and the long and short stitch allows you to do this. So I quickly wanted to go over how to do the long and short stitch, and I just drew a little square here, and I'm using 2 different colors. I'm using 3348 and 469. They're just 2 shades of green colors that are pretty different, but I wanted to keep them pretty contrasted so you could actually see the individual stitches. So the long and short stitch is exactly what it sounds like. You are making long and short stitches, and they're laid next to one another. So basically what you'll do is, I'm gonna fill in half of the shape with the darker green color. So first you'll just go ahead and stagger your stitches. You wanna make them right next to one another. And you want to kind of stagger the stitches in different lengths. And they don't have to be long, short, long, short. They can be kind of random. So you could do long, short, short, long, short, long, long, short, you know, anything. I don't really think about it too hard. I kind of just go ahead and stitch it and try to kind of make it natural, because your eye can kind of pick up on patterns, and when you stitch patterns, it makes it more obvious, and the whole point of using the long and short stitch is to blend colors together more subtly. So that is why it's important to vary the lengths of your stitches. So I went ahead and stitched half of that shape, and now I'm going to go in with the lighter color, and I'm going to go up through those long and short stitches and basically blend these colors together. So I'm actually going to overlap these stitches together a little bit in order to blend them. And like I said, this is not going to be a super subtle blend, because I picked pretty different colors, different shades of green, but this is just kind of to show you how the stitches are staggered. So you want to start up and go up through the color. It tends to help to blend colors together better that way. And it also just kind of forces you to get up in the other color to blend it, instead of leaving space in between the stitches. And if I'm kind of going back through this, which if you can, don't do that as much, because it makes it a little more rough, but I missed a few spots from the angle I'm working. So basically, again, I am not doing a super strict pattern of long and short. I'm just kind of staggering things with varying lengths. And these stitches are also going in the exact same direction, which will make it easier to blend together. You don't want stitches to be going in, you know, every which way, because it'll be harder to blend them together. And that is pretty much that. And that's how you do the long and short stitch. And basically, if you feel like you blend 2 different colors together and they aren't as subtle as you thought, you can always go back through over top in between the 2 colors with another color to soften that blend a little bit if you need to. but for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. For the leaf, I will use a couple of different shades to gradually blend these colors together, and we'll get started on that in a second. So it's important to kind of think about the light source and any shadows that would be falling on this leaf. So I just wanted to quickly kind of go through my thought process on this. So because the leaf is kind of folded over like this, I'm going to stitch the underside of it a little bit lighter because it's going to be technically kind of closer to us. And then for this part right here, around this area, I'm going to exaggerate the shading a little bit of this so that you can tell that this is kind of a folded over part of the leaf. And also in real life, this would have a shadow on it because this is overlapping. So this area right here will be kind of a darker shade. And then I marked out the veins in the leaf. I'm not entirely sure if I'll stitch them for this tutorial, but this is more so just to show you the direction I'm going to be stitching in. So a leaf, generally, the veins run this way, so I think it looks more realistic to make your stitch direction that way. So on this side here, I'm going to be using kind of a medium green, and I think I'm going to blend it out into a lighter green towards the edges here. And then basically, I think that's about it. I'm not going to make it super complicated. I just kind of want to show you how I would blend colors together a little bit in this leaf and just kind of show you, stitch direction and all of that. So I think we'll get started, and I like to first get started on the darkest areas when I stitch things because normally they're shadows, which would mean that they're kind of farthest away. And this can be a little bit more important when you're stitching more complicated subject matter or, animals with fur, things like that. So that's just kind of a general rule of thumb. That's why I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and start in the darkest area, which is going to be kind of on this right-hand side of the leaf. So at the top here, I'm going to keep it pretty much vertical with the, the tip of this vein here. And then it will slowly kind of slant downward as I go. And I'm gonna just start at the edge of that little folded over part and shade in this area. And I will leave the colors I'm using on the screen as well if you wanted to kind of draw your own leaf and follow along. And I'm not worried too much about the length of these because I'm going to go back in with a lighter color and kind of overlap them. So sometimes I don't worry too much about being super exact on the length of my stitches, especially if I'm starting with shadows. The next color I'm going to use is 469, and I'm going to go ahead and blend that into these stitches here and end them at the center line here. And I want this to be a pretty crisp line because I want it to create kind of a seam similar to the way a leaf has, that center stem in it. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to really overlap into these stitches. These colors aren't super different, so it actually won't be hard to blend these together, but I think it will add a little bit more dimension using a lighter color instead of just packing this entire area with that dark green. So I'm following suit. I'm doing the same direction I was before, and I'm just starting in the existing stitches and then blending them by using long and short stitches of this other color. So I finished that up, and now I want to go ahead and do these parts of the leaf that overlap. And I chose a color that's pretty contrasting to what we've already used, because if I pick something too close, it's not going to translate as well. So I went ahead and picked this color 3348, and this color will definitely stand out and really pop. The other thing I'm going to do is actually split stitch around the edge of these turned up sides here. That will allow you to have a cleaner, crisper edge, and it will also kind of give it a little bit of padding, so it actually looks a little bit more like it's overlapping. So I'm just gonna go ahead and split stitch, or you can do like a back split stitch, which I find to be a little bit easier because I'm only using a single strand of thread to do this. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go around this little edge here before I add in stitches. And I think for these I'll just do satin stitches because the area is so small that there's really no need to do split stitches for this little turned up part. So I'm just gonna go ahead and finish outlining this with that split stitch, and then we will fill in this area. So now I'm gonna go in with the satin stitch on top of this, and I'm gonna go in right directly beside where I outlined it and then go over top of it. So I'm covering these stitches up completely, and I'm gonna go ahead and do these the opposite direction that we filled in the leaf to really make the differentiate it basically. So instead of going up this way, I'm going to make these kind of diagonally down like this. And even that I think will make a difference. It's very, very subtle, but I think every little detail that you think about and add in when you're thread painting can make a massive difference. And really take your time with this part and try to keep the edges neat as much as you can. And like I said, you want to be overlapping over top of the outline stitches you just made. So I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. So now we'll go ahead and work through this side here. And these stitches will be going basically the opposite direction, which will form kind of a V between the two sides. And I'm gonna start with the kind of medium green color, 469, because I don't think I'm gonna use the darkest color for this area since this is gonna not have as much shadow on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start in the center area here and just kind of fill in this area, about half of the leaf, with long and short stitches. And then we will do the outer edge with the lighter color, which will be 471. And that's kind of a more medium color. It's a little bit darker than the edge here. And like I had mentioned before, I'm just meeting in the middle with these stitches. I don't want them to overlap into each other too much because I want it to make a nice seam line. And sometimes I kind of play it by ear. With leaves, I might stitch down the center of it with a lighter color, or I might leave it. It kind of just depends. I think for this I might stitch down the center because I'm using the same color on both sides, so it's like very faint. It's hard to see. If I was stitching a leaf and I had two different colors on both sides that were a little bit more contrasting, you'd be able to differentiate and kind of see it more obviously. But I think because it's the same color, it's really blending in. So I think I will end up stitching down the center. I went ahead and split stitched the outline using 471 just to have a cleaner edge again. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and fill in the rest of this with long and short stitches. Again, I'm starting from in between those darker stitches and working my way out. And you can start from the bottom or the top. I know most of this I started from the top, but I just like to make sure that I work in a basically from like one side to the other and don't skip around a bunch. So I would just pick one side to work on or one area to work on and just kind of work, you know, left or right, bottom to top, so that you are stitching the stitches nice and neatly. Because when you skip around, it can make them harder to kind of blend together and lay together nicely. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the central vein into the leaf, and I don't want it to be super obvious. So I am going to use 471 still for the center since we're using that darker shade in the center. And I'm going to just split stitch down the center. I'm going to go ahead and continue using that color and just add a few long and short stitches for this stem here, but I think for the bottom I'm going to add in a little bit of extra darker green, so I'm not going to stitch the entire thing this way, just a little bit. So I think that's probably good right here, and then I'm going to go in with 469 and just add in a little bit of darker green to kind of give it a little bit of a shadow at the base here. And I think that looks pretty good. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and if you find yourself interested in learning a little bit more of how to thread paint different subject matter like animals and botanicals, I will leave a bunch of links for resources down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much.